Again, welcome to our directors training webinar today on public purchasing with the once director, John Arthur. Um, Before I introduce John, I just wanted to, as I always do, mention that if you have any questions for John, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. That will enable us to kind of sort through questions and make sure we know which ones have been asked and which ones have been answered and things like that. If you have a chat with, you know, something you want to tell us, like the chat's not working or the audio is bad, or just to say hi, you can use the actual chat. And we'll be using that if we have to share any links or files or anything that you might need um, during this. Um, Jen and Pat, do you have anything else before I introduce John?
No, I'm just glad that we're able to do this, and I'm glad to see John again.
Yeah, as are we all. Um, Yep. Okay. So John Arthur is the borough administrator for the borough of Garwood, New Jersey. He's the former director of the East Brunswick, Englewood, and Metuchen libraries, where I live. Um, he holds an MBA from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and an MLIS from Rutgers. He's also a writer and a musician. What instruments do you play?
Guitar and sing.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Nice. He is not a lawyer, and none of what he presents on public purchasing should be constituted as legal advice. You should take all of this information and discuss it with your attorney. And without further ado, take it away, John.
Yeah,
Um,
thank
by,
you.
by the way, we're going to go dark and mute ourselves, but we're going to be here in case something happens that we can jump right back in. So it's just so we don't like distract you or anything like that.
Okay, sounds good. And one thing I actually probably should have added to my bio that I forgot to send is that I'm also a qualified purchasing agent. So I did get that license. I guess I passed the test December of last year. So I'm a qualified purchasing agent, which I'll talk a little bit about throughout this whole presentation. And just, nice to see, well, I'm not seeing anybody, but nice to see names so many names that I recognize here today. Some people I used to work with as well. So we'll jump right in. Can everybody see my slides here?
Yes. Yes, they're
All right,
up.
great. So we're going to go through a number of topics today. I'll probably break a couple times for some questions, and then we'll have a chance for questions at the end as well. We're going to go through local public contracts law a little bit, quotes, bids, requests for proposals, requests for quotations, or requests for qualifications, what lowest responsible and responsive bidder means, what aggregation means in regard to payment of vendors, local finance notices, state contracts and co-ops, national contracts and co-ops, NJ Start, which is like a database of state contracts that you can look into, pay to play, prevailing wage, emergency contracts. So we'll look at a real life example of a purchasing issue that came up in the past couple years. And we'll talk a little bit about what goes into becoming a qualified purchasing agent. Some of you probably have QPAs that work in your town or that work with you. And yeah, so we'll jump right into that. So there's a lot of rules in New Jersey about public purchasing. New Jersey has some of the strictest public finance and purchasing laws in the country. But most issues that arise aren't so much about knowing the rules and laws, but about either human error or, in some cases, willful disregard of the rules. We can talk about some examples later. Issues sometimes arise where the power dynamics of a town are such that somebody pushes through purchases that maybe shouldn't happen correctly. I won't, call any towns out in particular, but auditors look at this stuff. I've both as a library director and as a borough administrator, I've had auditors ask for, proof that we've got quotes and proof that we've gone to done the bidding process correctly. And if you don't have that, it ends up in your audit report, which goes to your board or your mayor and council, and that obviously doesn't look very good. Um, so the local public contracts law basically governs everything that we're talking about. If you want to look at the actual law, it's 40A:11. Rutgers actually has a pretty good guide here. If I click it, hopefully it'll pop up. And can you see that it popped up or no?
No, it might be in a different window.
Here,
Um,
I'll share that real quick.
yeah, I just had one while you're doing that, John. I just had one quick question from someone that was asking if these slides will be made available after the presentation.
I can, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, that would be very helpful, I think, for people to get all the links and things like that. So
Yeah,
much
and I'll also
appreciated.
send my contact information, and people can call, email whenever they'd like. So
Okay, that sounds great.
um
Thank you very much.
but yeah, if you see this reference guide, obviously it's like, I don't know, 400 pages. I'm not going to go through, it's to 195 pages. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it is a really helpful guide in that, it has these like links in it. So if you're looking for something like, I need to learn how long a contract can be for competitive contracting, you find it, you click the link, and you're right where you need to be to read about that topic. Um, I'm constantly looking at this. Just because someone has their QPA doesn't mean they've memorized all these laws. That would be impossible. You just have to kind of constantly be looking this stuff up. So just wanted to show you that that guide is there. It's available online, and it is, ready for all of you if you need it.
It's
So,
actually also available on the library law page, the state library.
oh, great.
Yep.
Not surprised, but as it should be, and good job to our state librarians there for getting it together. So yeah, local public contracts law and the administrative code basically governs everything we're going to talk about today. So that's where you go back to when you really need to find different information. The quote threshold is 15% of the bid threshold. The bid threshold is 17,500 without a qualified purchasing agent and 44,000 with one if approved by resolution by the governing body. So this is something that comes up just because someone has their QPA, or you have someone on staff or someone in the town that has the qualified purchasing agent license. If your board doesn't pass a resolution that says we are appointing this person, or giving this person the authority as a qualified purchasing agent up to X amount of dollars, 44,000 being the max, then your bid threshold is still 17,500. You have to have that resolution memorializing that for it to be true. What does that mean? The quote threshold and the bid threshold. Basically, the bid threshold means if you're doing a purchase above that amount, you have to go out to bid through a formal process that needs to be advertised, that needs to, go into a local newspaper that your official paper. It needs to be a fair and open process. The quote threshold being 15% of the bid threshold basically means you just have to ask for quotes if it's above 15% of that amount. So it's 2,625 without a QPA and 6,600 with an approved QPA. Below those amounts, technically, you could just make a purchase without getting multiple quotes, but that doesn't mean it's a good practice. So there's two different issues in that. There's what you legally have to do and what actually makes sense for your library. And I would argue whenever you can, get multiple quotes, because you might find that you're going to save a lot of money doing so. Just yesterday I made one phone call that pretty much is going to save our borough like $12,000. And you just don't know until you ask. So, try to always double check things. Just because you're going above and beyond the standard doesn't mean you can't help your organization by doing so. Thresholds are supposed to be updated every 5 years. It's actually supposed to be happening like I think any day now. I haven't seen anything yet, but it's due to happen pretty soon, I think. So that should be changing this year. There's different bid thresholds for school districts, county colleges. I don't know if we have any school librarians or county college librarians or anything like that. If you are in that situation, or if you get a job in those fields in the future, just look at those thresholds. They're just slightly different rules, but similar rules at the same time. All right, so we talked about this a little bit. You need to get at least 2 quotes minimum if it's above the quote threshold. Some places go by 3 or 4. Again, your local rules can be more strict, but they can't be less strict than the law. But again, getting more quotes is not going to hurt. In fact, it could help a lot. You should keep a record of it. Like I said, I've been asked about this during audits. It's not a good thing if you can't show that you've actually tried to get quotes. Another thing that comes up a lot is the quote should be for the same product or service. So if you're buying flooring, you know, you can't say, I got a quote from vendor A and it's half an inch thick vinyl flooring and it was $30,000 for the children's room. And I got a quote from vendor B and it's carpet and it's, $10,000. Well, the carpet and the vinyl flooring are completely different. You should really be getting 2 quotes for vinyl flooring, 2 quotes for carpet, and comparing like things to like things. The quote should be in writing, or you should have at least some record of it. And some organizations use like a standardized quote form. Our engineer here does that. It's really helpful when he sends us the quotes that he's gotten for these big projects. It's all very laid out for us. So that's just a kind of a smart way to do it. Again, if it's above the bid threshold, this is where you have the advertising requirements at least 10 days in advance of a bid opening in an official newspaper. Bid openings cannot be scheduled on a Monday or any day directly following a state or federal holiday. There's a story, and I'm not sure if it's just made up or not, but in our qualified purchasing agent classes, some of our teachers told the story that apparently there was some like state senator or state elected official that was upset that they couldn't have a bid on a Monday for their company or something like that. So they made a whole law basically saying that it can't be on a Monday because it personally affected them. I don't know if that's true or not. It sounds kind of true, like it's something that would happen in New Jersey. But anyway, that's why apparently you can't have a bid opening on a Monday or after a state or federal holiday. When you do the advertisement, you need to say, where you're opening the bids, how you're receiving the bids, how you're sharing the bid package, time and place, and as much detail as possible, but those are the minimum details that you need. Keep in mind that, when contractors show up, they might ask to see the other bids. We always let them even take pictures of the prices of the other vendors because it's all open, public information. We get a lot of Open Public Records Act requests for this information, and it's legally allowed, so it doesn't hurt to share it. We typically read the bids aloud as well. And, the contract must be awarded by the governing body. In your case, the library board, in my case, mayor and council. The length of the contract should be spelled out in the resolution. Different types of contracts are allowed to have different lengths. You have to really look at the law for that. Most are 2 years. Professional services, such as like a labor attorney, are 1 year. But I'll use an example. We're doing recycling contract here in Garwood, and that can be 3 years with a 2-year renewal, so up to 5 years. Just because something like a recycling service that is picking up recycling in town, it doesn't make sense to just do a 1-year contract. It's too costly to get the service up and running. It makes more sense for it to be a longer term contract. So it is allowable by law, whereas other things are not allowable beyond 2 years. Your best source of information when I was working as a library director is your municipal clerk. So, try to always have a good relationship with your clerk. I was lucky in that our clerks in most of, I think all of my jobs actually, would come over and do the bid openings with us. If we ever had a bid opening, they would come, open the bids, do the readings, and help with the advertising, because it was something that as a library director, I did some of, but not as much as they do. They do them all the time. So the difference between RFPs and RFQs, request for proposal and request for qualifications. Sometimes these terms get used interchangeably, but there are kind of slight differences. RFPs are typically like a specific project where, let's say, you're renovating your children's room and you want to do, new lighting and new flooring and a larger bathroom and new desks and all that in one big package. You're going to put that together and specify every single thing you need, put it out for an RFP. They're going to bid on it with a set price, most likely, of, you know, what they're going to pay. And then you go with the lowest responsible and responsive bidder. We'll talk more about those terms later. RFQs for, you know, for qualification are different. They're things like, you know, your labor attorney, your library board attorney, and engineering service, where it's not necessarily just this one project. This is typically done annually. You know, a lot of our directors who've been directors for a while, this is not going to be new to them. You know, you put it out, you get the qualifications back. It gives the resumes of the attorneys and what their hourly rate is, and then your board appoints one of them. Lowest responsible and responsive bidder. So responsible, I'm just basically quoting from the law here, but responsible means able to complete the contract in accordance with its requirements, including but not limited to requirements pertaining to experience, moral integrity, operating capacity, financial capacity, credit, and workforce equipment and facilities available. Basically, can they do the job? Are they responsibly representing that, you know, their company can complete the work that you've put out? You cannot deem a vendor not responsible based on another organization's past experience. I just realized I put a double negative there. But basically, if I live in Summit, so I'll pick Summit and Chatham, where I used to work. If the Chatham Public Library has a terrible experience with a vendor, the Summit Library can't talk to Chatham and say, oh, that vendor was terrible, we're going to eliminate them from our bid process based on Chatham's experience. Unfortunately, you can't do that. You have to have the bad experience yourself, and you have to document it really well. So otherwise, you open yourself up to a potential lawsuit if you give the bid to, you know, the second lowest bidder because you just don't want to give it to the lowest bidder. Responsive is basically, does it meet everything in the bid package? You know, the terms and conditions, the specifications, the legal requirements, you know, other provisions. There's things like you have to certify that these are New Jersey state laws, but you have to certify that you don't do business with certain countries, or you have to certify that you know, you meet certain standards of Equal Opportunity Act and things like that. If they don't meet those standards, then they can be eliminated. If they don't, let's say in the bid it says you need to have, you know, certain equipment to complete the job, and they say, you know, I don't actually have the equipment, then, you know, they're not really responsive in that way either. So there are fatal errors, which means if they're missing certain documents, which I'm not going to go through exactly what all those are, you'd have to look at that case by case, then it automatically eliminates the bidder. Non-fatal errors can be corrected after the fact. There's certain things like, I think like a New Jersey business registration certificate. I think as long as they have that before the work starts, then they're fine. It's just, they're not automatically eliminated just because they didn't submit it with their package. They have to show it at a certain point before the work starts. Aggregation. This is actually, I think, the thing that comes up the most when it comes to things like audits. This is where you hire a vendor for one project that's $2,000 and another project that's $3,000 and another project that's $10,000. And all those projects are, you know, related things. And suddenly by the end of the year, you've spent $50,000 with that vendor. You've gone over the bid threshold and you didn't put it out the bid because it was kind of piecemeal. It was an aggregate. You really have to go out the bid, even if you're going over the bid threshold on an aggregate basis. So you have to keep track of that stuff. We're going through this right now where we're going to have to go out to bid for a certain type of service that, you know, I suspect is going to go over. So I'm putting together a bid package to make sure we don't go over the bid threshold. You know, I just made up an example here. You know, let's say you're a big library system, you got a bunch of vans or bookmobiles, and you keep needing to go to repairs to the same auto mechanic. You know, by the end of the year, you've spent $100,000 with that mechanic. Your auditor's probably going to look at that and say, you had to either go out to bid or you had to formally, you know, award that vendor as your mechanic at some point. So you just got to be careful to look for that. If any of you use like a finance system like Edmunds, You can track that in Edmunds, throughout the year, or maybe create your own spreadsheet for some of your bigger vendors. Because I have seen places get not so much into trouble, but auditors asking questions about those types of situations. Another good resource are the local finance notices that the Department of Community Affairs puts out. So they clarify finance and purchasing rules, and also in a way set those rules when things are not clarified. They're also really valuable when you're doing something new that you've never done before. So like within, I've been now a borough administrator for about a year and a half. And within, I think, like 3 to 6 months, we were buying a new garbage truck, which is like $400,000. We bought it from a national co-op, which is something I'd never done before. Jen says, John, you do not need to go out to bid for book vendors, correct? Yes, so I should say, I don't know the exact part of the law, but there is something that says something like libraries are exempt for the bid threshold for things that are like educational resources. So there is a lot of leeway with libraries when it comes to things like book vendors. I think databases. Again, take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt and talk to your lawyers if you're really worried about any of it. But yes, if we all had to go out to bid for Baker and Taylor or Brodart or something, we'd probably all be losing our minds every year. So no, you do not need to go out to bid for book vendors. Thank you for that question. But something like, again, in our municipality, a garbage truck, or more likely in a library, something like a bookmobile. We use the national co-op, which has a whole different set of rules, which let me try to pull up real quick here. Reshare my screen. So here's the local finance notices, but can everybody see that? But basically, if you click through, it's just different topics that are relevant to finance and purchasing. See if I could find the one for national co-ops. I think it's in 2010. No, that's all right. I don't need to find it. But basically, these are really helpful in that for the one for national co-ops, it was able to tell me I had to advertise the actual contract that we were entering into. I had to make sure that our town was a part of the national co-op. I had to write up a whole report that basically shows that the municipality is saving money by making the purchase through a national co-op as opposed to other means of making the purchase. That's different than the rules for like a state co-op. You don't necessarily need to take all those steps. So looking at the local finance notices taught me all these different steps that I needed to make a national co-op purchase in a way that was allowable. So going to state contracts and co-ops. So, many of you probably used state contracts before. Example is like Bergen bids for a co-op. The way that works is something like an organization like Bergen Bids goes out to bid on behalf of everybody. As long as you have the resolution and the necessary paperwork to join that co-op, you can then use the pricing that they've agreed on. So when you get the quote from a vendor and it says, actually literally just got a quote from a vendor, I think 45 minutes ago that is from the Bergen Bids co-op. And the first thing I do, because just to double check, is you want to go look for the actual contract that they have, because just because the vendor says it on the quote doesn't mean it's 100% true. Sometimes they have the contract for cabling and wiring and servers, but they don't have the contract for all this other hardware that they also have in the quote, and they're quoting it, and they're not necessarily putting in the information that they only have the contract for X, Y, and Z, but not for A, B, C. And they're kind of presenting it in a fuzzy way where they actually are kind of saying they have the contract for all of it. I have seen at least once or twice where either the contract is not exactly what they're presenting it as, or the contract's actually expired. And, you know, the one time they're like, oh, well, we're in the process of renewing it. I'm like, well, that's great, but it's not actually active right now. So little bit of misrepresentation happening in the quote there. You can actually check. Here's the local finance notice for the national co-ops, which we already kind of talked about. I never used the national co-op when I was a library director, but I have used it now a few times as a borough administrator. So, you know, it has been helpful. NJ Start. Let's go through NJ Start a little bit here. I'm going to share my screen again here for NJ Start. So NJ Start, like I said, is the database of different contracts that you can use. And this is where you can really get into the fine details of a contract when someone sends you a quote. So let me share my screen. All right, can everyone see NJ Start here?
Yep.
Okay. So I'll use an example. Just yesterday, we were working with the police department to get body cameras, which they already have, but we need to just get a new contract. We use this company. We got a quote from this company, Axon. You know, I wanted to go in and make sure. So I went to NJ Start, search for vendors, search for Axon. It's this Axon Enterprise here. So you could see, you know, when they were incorporated, you know, their status is active, their vendor ID, make sure that all matches on their quotes. Then you can actually search for the actual contract itself. So let's see if I could find that. Yeah, so Axon, law enforcement equipment and supplies and firearms. The bid number, the fleet number, this all matched their quote. So, you know, it was good news that everything they put on their quote was accurate. But you want to get into the fine details here a little bit, right? So, you know, the original contract, it looks like it was signed back in probably 2017 here. You know, contract extension 6/2/25. So, you know, if you open that, I don't know if it's going to show if you open that. But basically I double checked that, and yes, they are currently an active contract. So you click through these things and just make sure everything matches. You know, I had to get into the actual contract itself, which is also on this list here. And it's very long, but because the quote that we got includes body cameras and artificial intelligence software and all these different things, I just wanted to make sure they actually have a contract for all of those things. So, you know, that's where Control F is your friend. You can search through the document, you know, and look for body cameras or whatever it might be. Let's go back to the slides here. So yeah, again, just make sure you double check, because I have seen people fabricate a little bit on their quotes. So pay to play is another threshold that's a little different than the bid threshold. It's always 17,500 regardless of whether you have a qualified purchasing agent or not. It's mostly about like what is allowable for things like campaign contributions. Recent changes make it so campaign contributions in excess of 200 are reportable. That's down from 300, but it now makes things allowable that weren't allowable before. So before, you couldn't get a contract if your company gave $300 to like a county political committee, but now it doesn't matter. A county political committee is allowable, a municipal political committee is allowable, but not to like an individual candidate's campaign. So basically the way it works now is you give, let's say you give $500. Let's say you're a roofing contractor. I'm just making something, or an architect. I use an architect here as an example. You donate $400 to the mayor's election campaign. That architect cannot be awarded a non-fair and open contract. But if the architect donates $400 to the county Democrats, they can still get the contract. Non-fair and open basically means there's no formal bid, RFP, RFQ process. Basically, it's like I call up a couple architects and say, hey, you want to work on this project, and kind of work it out, and then the governing body votes to approve them. Fair and open is where you do the formal bid, the formal RFP, RFQ, where you put it out for advertisement. You know, you make sure everybody has a fair chance at it, an equal chance at it. If you do it fair and open, you can still give someone the contract even if they do make the political contribution, because you're doing it by lowest responsible bidder and you're doing it in a fair and open process. There's a lot more to pay to play. You know, you could do a whole class about it. This is just kind of an overview. So if you want to learn more about it, definitely look into it a little bit more. Like I said, as a new qualified purchasing agent and someone who's done purchasing for a little while, even before, I constantly have to look all this stuff up. You know, I memorized some of it for a test that I had to take, and it's like cramming for an exam. You forget half of it after the minute you walk out of the exam. So you just got to keep looking it up whenever you need to use it. Prevailing wage. This one's important too. I've seen a lot of this actually. So, public works projects in excess of 16,263 must pay prevailing wage, which is basically based on like an average of collecting bargaining agreements in an area. So if you look on the website of you know, the Labor Department, they show the prevailing wage rates in different counties. So you can just go to your county and look up the different prevailing wage rates. Sometimes I'll get quotes and it'll be one contractor quotes it at 30,000 and another one quotes the same exact work at 15,000. And I immediately look at it and say, there's something wrong here. And what's wrong is that the 30,000 is paying prevailing wage and the 15,000 is paying way less than that. So you just got to make sure if it's above this threshold that they're actually paying prevailing wage, which then needs to be reportable to the state. And you know, I actually, you know, this is something that has come up in a library setting for me, doing things like flooring projects and renovation projects. You just got to make sure they're actually paying prevailing wage. Not only can the vendor get in trouble, but the person hiring the vendor can also get in trouble for not honoring that. And honestly, just personally, people should get paid fairly for their work. That's just my own personal opinion. So there's a reason that prevailing wage laws exist so that people, the workers, aren't really taken advantage of. Emergency contracts is another one where people can sometimes get into some hot water. An emergency contract must affect the public health, safety, or welfare and requires the immediate delivery of goods or the performance of services. So you have to have someone who's like the official in charge of the agency who can determine whether there's an emergency. They can exceed the bid threshold because it's an emergency. It still needs to be awarded by the governing body, but this can be after the fact because, again, emergency, you might need to do it immediately. Can we do like a yes or no poll? Or I don't even know. People can just put it in the chat kind of for fun. But let's do a little game of emergency or not for, I'll read one to you. So this year's summer reading celebration is happening in 1 week in the basement of the library. The basement is flooded and the flooring all needs to be removed and replaced. There is a vendor willing to do it at 4 times the normal cost by working overnight and paying overtime to its workers, as well as paying to rush the materials. So what do you think? Would you deem that as an emergency or not? I'm seeing a lot of no's, a couple yeses. I'm seeing Rodwa and Michelle with really good answers, suggesting to maybe move the event. So yeah, I mean, I think we're mostly in agreement here. It's not really an emergency. It might feel like an emergency. Trust me, I've been there. You're planning something for months and it's all going to fall through and, you know, you're excited about it. Feels like it might be an emergency, but it's not currently affecting the health, safety of the public because it's not like the event's actively happening. You know, it can be moved. Maybe it's moved to a different location. So no, I personally would not deem that an emergency. But there are places that have deemed similar things as emergencies, and some of those places have gotten themselves into a little bit of trouble by doing so. Thankfully, I didn't see any examples of libraries doing that. I did see some examples of municipalities and counties doing certain things like that. So let's see. Let's go back to our little game here. Sorry, my screen has the zoom up. Do you all still see my slides?
Yep. We
Okay.
see them.
All right, so second one. An electrical malfunction is discovered in the electrical system at the library. This electrical malfunction significantly increases the chances of a fire in the building. It's a small town library, and the library and police department are connected. So even if you close the library, you need to keep this circuit on to power the police station. One electrician can do the work quickly at an increased cost. Another can do it for less money, but not for a few weeks. What do you think? All right, I probably made these too easy, but everybody's saying yes. I agree. I would deem this one an emergency. But people don't always. There's no cut and dry to this always. You know, I probably could have come up with. I tried to come up with some examples that maybe had a little bit more gray area. I'll try to work on that. But you know, sometimes it's a tough call, and unfortunately, you don't necessarily know till after the fact whether people would truly deem it an emergency or not. So, let me go back to slides here. All right, we got a couple more and then we'll have some questions. I realize it's been about 40 minutes of me rambling on here. So a real life example, and I'm not saying who was right or wrong here. So I'm not trying to cause any offense to anybody, but Essex County got a report from the New Jersey State Comptroller. They investigated, and the comptroller's opinion, and I'll just quote from them, is that the county overused the emergency exception to public bidding, you know, failed to implement adequate policies for control and monitoring of contracts with business vendors, likely increased overall costs for taxpayers, and led to an overpayment of more than $110,000 to a vendor. And you could read a lot. There's like a 12-page report about this on the comptroller's website, which I actually personally found, I didn't read every word of it, but I kind of found it fascinating. Just kind of interesting case study. You know, Essex County responded that they felt like they were actually working under certain authorities that were given by executive orders during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the comptroller in Essex County basically, they disagree. You know, the end result of it was basically a report came out from the comptroller. It had some recommendations for the county. I don't think there were like fines or anything like that. So, you know, but still, you don't necessarily want the state comptroller writing a report about your organization and claiming that you did things wrong. So, you know, there's a lot of examples on the comptroller website. You can actually go on there and look through all their reports, and you can find some interesting stuff on there of examples of places that have either gotten around the rules or tried to get around the rules and failed. But you know, it's not an irrelevant topic. These things do happen every year, every month, sometimes. So. All right, so just one last thing. If any of you are ever interested in the qualified purchasing agent classes and things like that, you need to basically have, you know, 2 years of higher education and 2 years of government purchasing duties. And I think working as a library director or, you know, even probably as a department head, I can't guarantee you that they would count that, but I think they should. You know, you do a lot of purchasing. It's probably half your job when you're in any administrative role. You also have to take a bunch of classes through Rutgers, and you have to then pass an exam. Just wanted to kind of throw that out there if anyone's interested in learning more about it. And other than that, does anyone have any questions for me?
Hey, John. So, yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. Great information. Very good introduction to the topic. We do have some questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to get through those. But if anyone has any questions while we're answering those, please do put them in the Q&A so that we can ask John while he's here. So the first question says, are IT support / consultants considered a professional service?
So just off the top of my head, I'm like almost positive that that is a yes. But again, I would always go to the local public contracts law, double check that for certain. because it does generally spell out what's defined as what. So, fairly certain that's a yes, but I would double check it just to be safe.
Okay. Next question is, does aggregation apply to the quote threshold too?
So that one's usually trying to think how that would work. I guess if you're buying, in a way, yes. Like, let's say you're trying to get around the quote threshold by splitting a purchase up, and I'm gonna buy $2,000 worth of this from them this month, and then $2,000 more from them the next month, and then 2,000 just kind of on purpose, so you don't have to get multiple quotes. Then that would be a
Mhm.
yes.
Mhm.
So, but if you're doing, let's say you're buying, I'm gonna make up something. You're buying $2,000 worth of candlesticks in January from someone. I don't know why you would need $2,000 worth of candlesticks in a library, but and then 6 months later you have a totally different project, and it's completely unrelated service. You know, the same company also sells pencil sharpeners. You're probably fine. But if you're purposely breaking it up to get around the quote threshold, then you should not do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Next question is, what if my RFP comes back over the bid threshold, for a lighting renovation? Do I then need to go out to bid?
Yeah, you're supposed to then. If you're, even if a quote, like an RFP or a quote comes back over the bid threshold, that signals to you that you really should be going out to bid for it. Yeah.
Next question. How do we ensure that a vendor really is paying prevailing wage?
So when they have that requirement for a public works contract, they're supposed to be submitting payrolls to you and to the state. So when I worked at, I think it was East Brunswick, we had a project where, they were sending me their payrolls, I think weekly. So you literally see their payrolls and see the hourly rates that they're paying to their employees, and it better match the prevailing wage or they're going to get
Hmm.
themselves in trouble. And I actually had, I don't remember what job this was at. It might have been here. The state reach out to me and say, show that they submit. I guess they weren't submitting it correctly to the state, but they were submitting it to, the entity. Show that they submitted the prevailing wage document. Thankfully, we had it all, so it wasn't a big deal. And they were actually paying prevailing wage, but the state looks for it as they should.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question. We recently had a situation with a subcontractor on our project, ended up having no wait, wait, ended up not having a public works registration or certification. Can you mention what that is?
Yeah, so the public works certification is something that for public works, the projects that are defined as public works, which again you'd have to get into the legal language of what that is, but something like, let's just say you're building a new building or knocking down a whole room and renovating it, it probably meets the definition of a public works contract at that point. They're supposed to be registered as a public works. It's a whole state registry system where they have to have an apprenticeship and meet certain standards as a public works contractor, and you're not really supposed to be giving them contracts if they don't have that. So unfortunately, Alan, um, you know, contractors will try to get around that sometimes by the contractor has it, but their subcontractor doesn't. And that's where you want to maybe get into the RFPs that when you write them, that specify the rules of what is allowable with regard to subcontractors. You know, I've seen RFPs where it just says you can't subcontract any of this out. Or if you do, the subcontractor still needs to meet or exceed the standards of the contractor or meet the public works contract laws. Sometimes it's hard to know. Let's say company A gets the contract and they're doing the work and they're doing the work and they're going along. I don't know whether the workers that are showing up work for company A or whether company A is turning around and paying company B and presenting it like they're their employees. They got to have to do some due diligence, and unfortunately, not everybody's honest. So, it's kind of what it comes down to.
Yep. All right. Next question. For prevailing wage check, is there a place or resource to check when a vendor files slash sends a payroll certification to compare and ensure wages meets the appropriate standard for their trade slash craft?
Yeah, so that's where again they were submitting it to us as well as to the state. Um, and I think there's a whole like I think our public works director is more involved in this and our engineer. And again, this is another one you're gonna have to double check what I'm saying. But I think there's a whole like NJ Wage Hub or something like that now, where you can look up this stuff and double check everything. But again, don't quote me on that one. That just sounds vaguely familiar to me. But also just have them send the payroll certs to you as well. And you know, that's basically the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I'm bringing it up now, the NJ Wage Hub. If you just Google for that, it looks like there's a ton of information about what we're discussing. So you just Google NJ Wage Hub and take a look through it and see what is there, and hopefully answers questions you have. All right. Been getting more and more questions in
It's
as we've
fine.
been going along,
I'm
which is
happy to
good.
answer them. So
Yeah, we still have some time, so
yeah.
that's good. So next question. Web-based subscription software like Airtable, Asana that might exceed the quote threshold because of the number of users we have in a library. Does this fall under any special exception that would mean we don't need to get multiple quotes?
That's a good question. I actually don't know what Airtable or Asana do. I'm not sure if that would fall under like the library educational resource exception. It might. It really kind of probably depends on what they do. There's also certain things like other except, and this might get into the realm of like, please talk to your attorney if it gets to this type of point. But you know, certain services, there's no other service like them. They're the only ones that do what they do. And there are certain things like we did a contract last year, what's called like extraordinary specialized services. It was basically one company locally that could fix our fire engine. And it was like, there's literally no way to go out to bid for this because nobody else knows how to fix what's wrong, the specific problem with the fire engine. So we awarded it through the process of they're the only ones who can do it. So they're getting the contract. There's ways like let's say I don't know what Asana does. It sounds familiar. I probably should know what it does. But if it's something that only they do, you could probably find a way to award them the contract based on the fact that they're the only ones who do that service. If it and it might meet that library educational resource exception as well. But again, I'm just going to keep saying, please double check everything because I would have to double check it myself before I made that final decision.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question. If you're purchasing something off of a purchasing co-op like Sourcewell or ESC&J, and it will exceed $2,625 but stay under $17,500, do you still need to obtain multiple quotes?
So for state contract and for co-ops, you technically don't need to obtain multiple quotes. And in fact, even if it's above the bid threshold, you don't need to even go to bid because they've already bid by getting into the co-op. Essentially, the co-op and the state have done the bidding on your behalf. That being said, I have regularly found that even though the state contract price is supposed to be the best price you can get, it isn't necessarily. So in the past year, I've found at least 3 or 4 times where I have gotten multiple quotes and saved the town money just because I said, okay, great, the state contract's this, but that doesn't mean it's the best price we can find. So doesn't hurt to look. Sourcewell, I believe, is a national co-op. In that case, you need to show that it saves money. So the only real way to show that it saves money is to have something to compare it to, right? So in that case, I would look for something comparable, and because you have to write for a national co-op, I have at least have on file something that shows you looked for other options. So sorry to give fuzzy answers to a lot of these, but that's the truth of the matter is a lot of this is a little fuzzy, which is why it gets complicated. And that's why if you got 2 qualified purchasing agents in the room and 2 lawyers in the room, you might have 4 different opinions about some of this stuff. So again, please double and triple check everything before you do it, and don't just take what I'm saying as as an answer to all of the questions, basically.
Okay. Um, Next question. Our library needs a new room divider installed. I got two quotes, both over the bid threshold. SHI, the co-op, indicated that they are onboarding one of the vendors and created a state contract bid from them that was the bid we received plus a fee for the co-op. This is still more appealing to us over going out to bid because very few vendors create the room dividers, and we are concerned that we would not get bids if we created an RFP. Would you go through the co-op? Would going through the co-op with the new bid via them meet the requirements?
Okay, so as long as SHI really, again, double check their contracts, double check that the bids all went through, that they're active, which I've worked with SHI a bunch and they generally do have a lot of different contracts. You know, obviously they're a huge company. I think if you know that they're going to create the type of room dividers that you're actually looking for, and they actually do have all of the appropriate bids, and you have the resolution that your library is a part of that co-op, then I do think it would meet the requirements. Again, with the caveat, please double check everything I'm saying. So,
Yep.
yeah.
All right. Next question. My board has stated that the quote threshold is the maximum a library director can spend on anything without a vote of the board, e.g., a $5,000 piece of furniture approved in the general budget. I'm successfully steering them away from that, but have you heard of this? Is there a legal basis?
Yes, I've heard of this, not just in libraries, but just in general. I don't really think that there's a legal basis to it because it's more of your board can set that rule as a board. But I don't think it's based on any statute that I'm aware of. I will say I've had experiences like this where, as you said, you're steering them away from it. The best thing I've found is the more and more you build trust with them, the larger you can get that number, basically. You know, the more that they trust in you and you trust in them, the more comfortable they get. Suddenly they're like, okay, you can approve up to 10,000, you can approve up to 15,000. But that takes time, obviously. And Dawn, I'm sure you're doing a great job of building that trust, but depends on your board. So, but I do think, you know, if they want that to be the rule as a board, they can probably make that a rule. It's not a legal rule, it's just that's the board's rule. So,
Yeah, they might be able to put that in their bylaws or something like that.
right, exactly. And honestly, it's not necessarily about any individual director. It could just be there could be a lot of reasons for it.
Mhm.
But that's where trying to build that trust over time. I've personally had it happen where, you know, places say, "Oh, we don't let the director pay for anything over." I think it was like $2,000, and I won't say where that was. But then over a couple years, it was like, "Okay, go ahead, you're fine," you know. But it took a
Yeah,
little while. Yeah.
yeah. Trust takes time
Yep.
to grow. Okay, last question. Um, Operational efficiency software like HR management tools like ADP, Bamboo HR, et cetera, not educational. Does that fall under any handy dandy exception?
This one I would definitely talk to someone like the attorney about just to be safe, but maybe you could make the case that because the library is an educational institution in general, and that these allow you to fulfill that educational mission, that you might be able to find some sort of a workaround for something like that. But I would definitely double check it because it's not like you said, it's not directly educational to the public. But libraries have a lot more leeway than municipalities when it comes to purchasing, thankfully, because
Mhm.
you know, our legislative bodies don't always get things right, but someone a long time ago realized that libraries need a little bit more leeway with stuff like this, or you wouldn't be able to do your jobs. And well, I
Yep.
was going to say our jobs because in my head, in my heart, I will always be a librarian. So,
Mhm.
you know,
Mm.
it's it's there's a lot more leeway with libraries. Like for example, we really aren't supposed to go over our budget lines in a municipal budget at all. You know, like if we have a budget line and we need to do a transfer at the end of the year, and you can only do transfers at certain months, It's very strict. A library budget, as long as you don't go over your bottom line, kind of free to do whatever you want. You know, you might get in trouble with your board, but that's a whole
Mhm.
other conversation. You're not going to get in trouble with anybody else. You know, as long as you don't overspend your bottom line, you can go over on your book budget by $30,000 and you should be fine. Again, your board might have a problem with it, but you're not going to get in trouble with your auditors or anything like that.
Okay.
All right. And
Great.
like I
Well,
said, I will, Bob, I will send you the slides. I will
Mhm.
send you, rather than share my contact information in a Zoom that's going to be on YouTube, I'll send you my contact information. I don't mind everyone having it, you know, here.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then, yeah, please call me, email me, whatever. You know, looking at the names, I know half of you anyway, so please
Yeah.
reach out whenever you'd like.
Yeah. So I'll send it out just to the attendees that were here, just to that list. And then yeah, that's about it. I really appreciate, like I said, I really appreciate you taking the time today to come on and talk about this. I know it's during your work day too, so thank you for whatever arrangements you had to make to be able to do this. And yeah, Pat, do you have any other final words?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, John. I learned a lot, and you confirmed a lot that I already knew. But that was really very helpful, and I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of questions trustees have tonight.
Yeah,
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 it'll be interesting to see what the trustees are, what the trustee
Yeah,
concerns are versus the library director concerns. So,
very, very interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
you're right.
exactly. Yep. All right. Well, we here will be back then at 7 o'clock or a little bit before for the practice session. But you all, thank you very much for attending. And this will be posted on our YouTube channel. So if you want to send it around to anyone else at your organization, you can do that. We'll put that out on NJ Pub Libs when it's ready to go. And other than that, thank you very much. See you all later.
Thank
All
you.
right, have a
Take
good day.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.